At Boughton there are 9 ceiling paintings, all painted by the French artist Louis Chéron. These paintings mark about a 50-year period of our history at the end of the 17th and early 18th century, when the Baroque style was in vogue.
The Baroque period is a very short period of painting, but hugely important and influential. It shows our ties to European art, which is where it came from, France and Italy and so on. It shows the way the cross-culture was happening through Europe.
The Baroque style of wall painting tends to be dynamic movement, vivid colour, steep perspectives and complex ornament. Mythological scenes or historic scenes which depicted assemblies of the gods, usually from Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid.
These paintings are hugely important as part of our chronological story of how art developed through the centuries.
These particular schemes are an integral part of the building and are the only paintings by Louis Chéron surviving in this country. Because they were painted usually for an event such as a visit from the king to the country house, they tended to be rushed and therefore the preparation sometimes wasn't as good as it should be. In those days it was an uncontrolled environment and consequently tended to deteriorate over time. The result was these paintings tend to have been restored quite often throughout the 19th century and early part of the 20th century. Some of these restorations being quite ill-conceived, using materials which tends to discolour over time or become insoluble. As part of our process, we take photographs, detailed photographs of every inch of the painting really, before, during and after. Not just in visible light, but in UV light as well.
The previous retouchings fluoresce in a different way to the original paint, so very quickly you get a very clear indication of how much retouching is there and how much work is likely to be involved in treating that.
We came across extensive damage on the ceiling, the cornice and the walls of the great staircase.
A discoloration of varnish that was applied, not originally, as they weren't originally varnished, much to people's surprise. These ones particularly were varnished in the 19th century, and that varnish is discoloured to the sort of browny yellow colour that one kind of associates with aged paintings. The other issues we have are flaking paint and detachment from the plaster support, which is a problem that's inherent within the poor original preparation.
Before Louis Chéron did the painting, the ceiling and the walls had been painted with a soft distemper paint, which is in effect chalk and animal glue. This wasn't washed off properly before the oil paint was applied, and the paint flaked thereafter.
There were some very loose areas of plaster, particularly in the cornice, that were just sort of held by cobwebs and so on, which required removing and resetting.
On the ceiling, we found that there was quite a lot of metal soap damage to the paint. Metal soap damage is really when the metals in the pigments reacts to the oil medium. And in the case of the blue paint up on the ceiling, the result is it shrunk into a sort of granular texture. The conservation strategy was largely full conservation. We reattached all the flaking paint, we removed the discoloured varnish.
This was achieved by a number of treatment trials to come up with a suitable solvent mixture. These are applied by cotton wool swabs and just gently rolled over the surface. The paint fixing was carried out using a conservation-grade acrylic resin, just droplets behind each flake. The area treated was then allowed to slightly become tacky, and then we went over with heated spatulas, just applying very gentle heat to soften the distorted flakes so you could ease them back into position. We then carried out fills to open cracks and any plaster losses and finished off with a very smooth lime-based finishing plaster. And then the final phase on the ceiling has been the retouching, using paralloid-based pigments, and then a final varnish is applied on top of that, but the varnish that you apply on top is of a different solvent to the paralloid. And so for future cleaning interventions, if you want to just remove the varnish, you won't also remove the retouchings. That's a big emphasis in conservation these days. So everything you use has to be reversible in order that if for some reason somebody in the future decides that they want to have a different approach, they can easily be removed without damaging any of the original work.
It kind of commands quite a lot of attention and focus to kind of continually do it for such a long time, but always with the bigger picture in mind, bringing it back to life really.
So each one is slightly challenging. You'd think, okay, we've got our method, we can just keep on, ceiling after ceiling doing the same thing, and it's not really like that. You have to fine-tune each time.
Today, much of our work involves removing materials added by previous restorers. Of course, today we're fortunate in having a great deal more time to do our work than previous restorers were allowed. We have advances in materials technology, and therefore we have much better acrylic-based retouching materials, adhesives, consolidants and varnishes that don't discolour over time and remain easily removable.
We feel that we're doing our bit in maintaining that important artwork in its best possible condition so that people in future can enjoy it more. The more that we do this kind of work, the more information comes into the public domain. And through that, hopefully, people will have more of a sense that these paintings are massively important and that money and time should be spent on making sure that they're preserved.
Our training allows us to work with some confidence on those paintings, knowing that we're not doing any damage, knowing that we are doing them a lot of good and preserving them for future generations. We're very fortunate. We work in the most wonderful buildings. This building is just knockout. It is just getting around and seeing such lovely stuff.
When you're up close and personal, you're seeing brush strokes, you're seeing fingerprints sometimes in plaster, and it kind of brings you in touch with the whole process of creating these works, and you do get a kind of a physical and sort of spiritual connection, which is very, very satisfying.